Stuff you hear. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Lucas Anderson from the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, and I'm hosting the event today. So my job is primarily to introduce our presenter, but I'm also on hand to facilitate questions and such. This event is Whose AI for Whose Interests? The Intentional Politics of Decolonizing AI for Black Pedagogy, presented by Tobi Adéwùnmí. I'm going to read the event description for you. This session will attempt to approach AI and AI dystopia from the margins by centering Black epistemologies and Afro-futurist aesthetics in two recent animations, Iwaju from Disney 2024 and Jurassic World Chaos Theory from Animation Works 2024. Our presenter will call for a more inclusive design thinking in developing and branding AI technologies for people of color, especially within predominantly white institutions, universities, and urban ecologies. The recording of this video presentation will be available at a later date. Please subscribe to the Summer of AI newsletter to stay informed about that and AI tips. If you have questions throughout the event, don't hesitate to place them in chat if you're joining us online, or of course, raise your hand if you're joining us in person. A host, possibly even me, will collect them and notify the presenter. A thumbs up on your message will be used to confirm that your question was received by the host. So with that, thank you for attending. I hope you enjoy. Let's turn it over to Tobi. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucas. It's a privilege to be here. I'm quite thrilled at what the CITL is doing, not just within the university, but the larger academic public. I picked up interest in AI, interestingly, out of the blues. This topic was born out of a very careful thought about the implications of artificial intelligence for Black worlds. So I'm an international student here at the U of I. I study and teach African studies and African diaspora studies. And on one of those days where I was speaking with one of my co-instructors about the AI policy for the course, it made me realize that it's simply not for Black students. And I was quite curious, why not? And so the question arose, who's AI and for whose interest? Now, the politics comes when I talk about resource allocation, right? Because that's what politics is usually about. But I'm not specifically talking about the politics out there, if you know what I mean. On Tuesday, February 25th, I received this message from supposedly an employee of Microsoft wanting me to complete a course called Design a Dream Destination with AI. And this course is a learning part on Microsoft Learn, and it tells students or learners how to elevate their skill project, boost their career prospects with AI skills, and enhance their productivity and creativity. And there was an interesting call to action there, not interested. And yeah, I had the same reaction. I mean, why would you invite me to attend a course and a call to action right underneath that wants me to decline that invitation? And I immediately started to think about the implications of AI technologies, AI softwares, AI courses for people of color, not just in the United States, but in the Black diaspora. This is a video, or rather an image extracted from a video of a ceremony of initiation into womanhood. It's one of the tribes people in Ethiopia. Ethiopia is one of the most renowned African countries. It has an upward of, say, 20 million people, and it has rich and diverse culture. Now, this picture, this particular image was taken by a travel photographer, a journalist, and it was probably enthused by the fact that people like him still celebrate festivals barely nude. And these are the kinds of images that flood social media. And so when you immediately think about African countries, the images you see. And you begin to think about how to craft and create a world that kind of captures this kind of image. More on this image later on. Now, in 2024, Disney Animation, one of the global conglomerate on animation and other forms of feature films, created a series that was African themed, and it called that series Iwaju. Iwaju in Yoruba language means forward, to move forward. And one of the protagonists of that film is this young girl named Tolani Martins. Tolani Martins was in our 12 teens, and for some reason, our dad could not trust her to take decisions on her own and had to develop a robot called Otin to monitor her, follow her because of the danger in Lagos. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria, has an upward also of 20 million people, one of the biggest commercial cities in the world. Next to that image is another young girl called Zaina Mbalo. She's also one of the supporting characters in a feature film produced by Animation Works. And many of us have seen or heard Jurassic Park, that popular, yeah, we know the dinosaurs and all of that. There is an adaptation of that film which was called Jurassic World. And in this world, dinosaurs are still under the threat of extinction. However, there's a group of 6 teenagers, American teenagers, who move from place to place to track how the dinosaurs are being trafficked. And one of the places they were trafficked to was Senegal. Senegal is an African country. And so when they landed in Senegal, one of the places they came to was the house of Zaina Mbalo. Now, a normal observer of those films wouldn't see anything wrong about them. These are the creative imaginations of the producers, the script writers, the characters that were involved. However, I was watching both films with my 4-year-old daughter, who came to the United States at a very young age. And I tried to show her movies that depict images back home for her to kind of remember where she's from and things like that, more like, the memory of her childhood. And for some reason, she couldn't relate to these characters because she has spoken to people back home. Every Sunday we have meetings, phone calls, Skype calls with my parents, my siblings, and she sees the dress, she sees the speech, she hears the speech rather, she sees how they relate. And for some reason, she says that these girls do not represent me. And that got me thinking too. Now, a very prominent businessman in the United States called Mikitani was at the Harvard Business School sometime last year. There's the CEO of Rakuten Technologies, the organization trying to leverage AI for business growth and whatnot. And he said that the future of AI is here. In that talk in the Harvard Business School, he talked about how the concept of AIization fuels growth within corporate organizations. And while I was reading that talk, I came to realize that this is the same concept at play within our universities. Trying to use AI to improve learning outcomes, use AI to improve the way people appreciate that course, or even use AI to train students on how to relate with course content. AIization. But do you know what else I thought about in AIization? It is not so much different from the concept of colonization. Colonization, as you know it, is where another power, another government, another body, another people goes to occupy another state, another people, another territory, and basically reclaim it for themselves. And that is what we see at play with AI. AI is banded us an all problem fixer, whether it's in the health sector, whether it's in the education sector, whether it's in the economy, what have you. You hear AI all around you. There's barely any advert you watch these days that wouldn't have something to do with AI. And so thinking about AIization, I realized that, well, the ivory towers stand against the concept of AIization. What are professors, faculty, what are researchers, whether at Bringer or even at GI School of Business, thinking about this concept of AIization? Now, the AIization movement essentially includes four important components. One is machine learning and predictive analysis, the ability to forecast consumer demand. And so when you see AI being used to not just collate, but also analyze user growth or user patterns, that's AIization at play. It also includes natural language processing. I bet some of us there are AI researchers that might be familiar with NLP. It's when you create virtual assistants to enhance customer service. Have you ever called maybe your cell phone provider? Can you hear a very interesting voice that keeps asking you to pick an option? That's the NLP at play. There's also robotic process automation, which automates repetitive tasks from filing your documents and what have you. And one of the more important ones, in my opinion, is the vision, the computer vision that transforms image and video data into actionable insights and aids in quality control and whatnot. This particular concept or aspect of the AIization movement is what many people have been using as deepfakes. Now, we're all familiar with the context around the US elections. Out there were so many disinformation and misinformation, and some people strategically use AI to promote their policy objectives and whatnot. This is where politics comes to play. Now, I call this the AIization industrial complex. The AIization industrial complex essentially talks about the complexities of using AI for teaching, learning, and research, especially within an academic environment like we are in. One of the issues that faculty, for instance, have with this complex is that now their research proposals may require AI integration plans. Many people are trying to develop a software that trains people how to conduct surgical procedures, or maybe a software, like I was told here at CIT, that now teaches graduates of the GI School of Business and how to negotiate. These kinds of proposals will require AI integration plans, and many faculty, in my opinion, have no idea on how to do that. And so rather than learn about this, they resist it. This past spring semester, I had conversation with no less than 5 faculty members asking them what they thought about AI, and they all dismissed it, even without the slightest edging of how it could be useful for their work. So that's a real problem amongst the faculty here at U of I. Another symptom is what students experience themselves, and I'm talking about students of color in the university. For instance, plagiarism detectors flag African American vernacular English, which is now a standardized language, as suspicious. Whereas when you insert the standard academic English, you get your results. And I've tried this everything because I try to be fluent in as much languages as I'm able to. And so I'm learning Wolof, which is a Senegambian language. And currently, you can't get a result when you prompt most AI softwares in Wolof. And this is a course that university mandates that students like myself learn as part of my African Studies program. And so if I cannot learn with an AI tool the languages I think I need to be proficient in my work, where do I stand? Now, this is not only limited to students and faculty, even publishers are now privileging Western epistemologies in the use of AI over indigenous knowledge systems. And even funders are now using grant algorithms to favor applications with existing AI infrastructure. So what that means is when you submit a proposal for funding, there is already an algorithm that is customized to filter the kinds of applications that will be moved on to the next level. And you can imagine, given what I just said, if you didn't have some of those things. Now, the house always wins. You watch that movie, The House, that episode, the popular one. But whose house is this? I think that AI is yet to stay, indeed, but there's a fundamental problem with the way we use AI. And like they say, don't hate the game, you can hate the player. I don't hate AI. I think AI is very vital to human existence right now. But I'm very circumspect about the way those who design AI softwares think and imagine the use of those tools. There's a principle, more like a philosophy in Africa called the Ubuntu principle. Has anyone here heard of the Ubuntu? Actually, there's an OS called Ubuntu. Yeah, right. And it's essentially what we call communalism. I am because you are. And this is a principle that has helped Africans and African descendant people around the world navigate complex situations around. They don't see themselves as the only humans in the world. They think they are embedded in the humanity of other people. And so unless the other person is successful at what they do, they don't consider themselves successful. And this is a principle that I think AI needs to start optimizing and utilizing for it to provide better services for people like me. Now, I want to give you some what I call disturbing statistics, and you can refute this if you have counter data. 87% of AI training data comes from the global north. Even that concept of global north is still in contest. 2% of AI companies are Black owned. 0.3% of AI research cites indigenous African knowledges. And I know this because I've been working with a wall of instructors here on campus to see how we can document some of the conversations we have for use, even in Google. I know a Yoruba translator who had worked with Google to kind of document some of the languages and iterations of the languages for Google's purposes, but still, an abysmal 0.3% cites indigenous African knowledges. Now, what is the problem here? We are looking at another era of extraction. It is ongoing and perhaps will be for another century to come. But unfortunately, AI is deepening that, making it more amenable to being exploited. We're also looking at that problem of linearism, the way people think just in straight lines. All right. You prompt this, it gives you what you want back. Everyone is good. We're looking at Western frameworks that are hegemonized and privileged over other indigenous knowledge systems. And that's why I'm proposing the Ubuntu alternative. What is the Ubuntu alternative? Number one, community-centered design. How can we begin to bring together multiple people to test AI softwares, AI bots, chatbots that we use for teaching and learning? Last semester, I organized a visit to the CITL lab, and I asked my students what they thought about their experience. They watched some YouTube documentaries and they played a VR game, and some of them told me they would never have come were it not for the cost. They even didn't know that lab existed. And so when the university is trialing this kind of softwares, who gets invited? Who is in the room when discussions are made? All right, so that's one way we can import the Ubuntu strategy. Another one is collective intelligence. What does that mean? How do we think as a community? How does the professor of software engineering at Gringer come together with the professor of African American studies to talk about ideas? What fora does the university push forward to bring together multiple identities and multiple epistemologies to think about moving the university forward? interconnected knowledge system, the fact that whatever is known and accepted as a canon here in the United States isn't so much different from what is known and accepted elsewhere in the world. How are we interpolating those ideas? And of course, mutual benefit for everyone. There are three kind of central issues with the Ubuntu system. One is what we call Sankofa. Sankofa means looking back and facing forward at the same time. There's the other one called Normal. It centers storytelling and the polyrhythmic system where you bring together multiple patterns in a fractal format. Now, I want to talk a bit about these two movies that I mentioned earlier and the problem that my daughter and myself found with them. Now, they were both AI enabled because AI had made it easy for filmmakers to produce movies at scale. And these two movies were examples of movies that were produced using AI technology. Iwaju. Iwaju, like I said earlier, was a movie where a young girl was the protagonist, was, co-opted, or should I say, co-embedded with an AI software. And that movie reimagines Lagos essentially through Silicon Valley's lens. African girls are now being portrayed as perpetually endangered, requiring Western-style tech salvation. And it occurred to me that many people who watch Iwaju may not have heard of the Amazon warriors, the Dahomey women warriors, who from the tender age of 8 are groomed to join the army and are the most elite force in their country's standing army. Same with Jurassic World. African children are reduced to trauma narratives. Their resilience are invisible to AI character development algorithms. In Jurassic World, Zaina, who knows the space? She grew up in the space. She had learned a lot of things from her grandmother, from her mother, and she understands where you should walk. The American teens who had superior knowledge about the movement of the dinosaurs didn't want her to lead them in the expedition, and so she kept mute. And on one of those trips, they wanted to go by land. And Zena knew that there was going to be a lion if they went that route. And she advised that they go by water, by boat. And so one of the teenagers screamed at her and said, "What do you know?" And it was at that instant that he heard 2 lions come up and almost devour them. Now, when people design softwares for other people, they barely know that these people may even have more superior knowledge about the users of those softwares than they do. Another interesting AI use was the 1000 Cup Journey, which was the VR game that I brought my students to play here. That game was designed by a lab, the Future of Intelligence lab at Stanford, in collaboration with Columbia. And in this game, Black families who experience racism essentially become educational content for empathy. Permichelle could remember how much I struggled to agree for us to use that game to teach the students because many of them have been traumatized by the experiences. At least 2 of my students had parents who have been incarcerated and had no reason to want to confront any law enforcement agent because of the trauma they've experienced. However, this remains the only game that a Black student can play on VR. At least so far, we realized. And that's the fundamental problem. So the pattern of extraction is still there. It moves on to Western profit. The reductionism is there. It leads to trauma tropes. And of course, Black worlds, Black people are seen basically as users, and it reinforces their pain and their situation. Now, I have a question here. What if we design AI to celebrate Black joy? The concept of Black joy is essentially how people of color, whether they're Blacks, Indigenous, Latinx, and what have you, are able to appreciate their identities, feel comfortable in their own skins when they're watching a movie or when they're playing a game. And I propose 3 critical pathways for the university to start thinking about. One is the community governed data. Can we have participatory algorithm design with historical Black colleges and universities? Can we start talking about revenue sharing models for those who contribute data? Can we also start talking about transparency in the use of AI in such a way that communities can audit and challenge certain AI softwares? The second pathway is for an Afro-futurist interface design. I'm talking about a nonlinear storytelling-based user experience. I'm not so much into UI UX, but the little conversation I had with you the other day made me realize that you can always iterate and improve on interfaces, whether it's a game, whether it's a software and whatnot. AI personalities representing diverse African identities ought to now be used in AI-enabled filmmaking. I'm also suggesting geometric patterns and cultural symbols, just like the Sankofa bird in UI UX. Here at the University of Illinois, Dr. Lou Turner of the College of Fine and Applied Arts told me about a course he was designing on the issue of African arts. And he got a grant from the university, and he told me that he wanted to be sure that every model in that course had an African symbol. Because really, historically, the history of art is in Africa. How would you understand art and all its ramifications without appreciating those symbols? And I think this is what we should see more in the university. And lastly, I call for a pedagogical revolution. Tutoring systems should recognize cultural learning styles. For someone like me who had never been exposed to AI, how am I introduced to the use of the software without it coming on my face? Research platforms should start elevating indigenous knowledge systems, and assessment tools should now value collaborative thinking. Now, I make some other recommendations here, and I'll skip through them because of time. But one important action or theoretical implication of what I'm discussing here today is the movement from AIization to AI liberation. Unless we make that shift in both our thinking and practice, we will not be able to use AI in such an ethical fashion that people of color would be represented and served. Now, finally, here is the U of I's perspective on generative AI. And I'll read it a bit and open it up for discussion. The University of Illinois system recognizes the potential benefits of generative AI in enhancing teaching, research, and healthcare for our students, our state, and the world. However, we acknowledge the need for appropriate and responsible use. We are committed to using generative AI ethically and in alignment with our guiding principles and our mission to transform lives and serve society by educating, creating knowledge, and putting knowledge to work on a large scale and with excellence. We believe that the responsible use of generative AI requires a multidisciplinary approach involving collaboration between faculty, IT professionals, researchers, students, and others. We acknowledge that this technology will evolve and that continued dialogue is needed. To this end, the U of I system is actively monitoring this topic and is engaging with stakeholders. And what questions are they asking to understand what generative AI can do and choose what the U of I system should do? If this is the case, why is it true that over 50% of faculty, of students at this university still don't know the use of AI for their courses? So I put it to everyone here that we haven't been inclusive enough in our use of AI here at the U of I. And I think if we start from here, we can extend it to the rest of the world. That's all I have to discuss today. I'm open to your questions, contributions, debates, and pushbacks. Thank you. All right.
I'll go question. I was wondering if you ever tried to train an AI agent to maybe simulate a culturally specific way of learning to interact with students. Is that possible? Do you think it'd be useful? And have you tried it?
Yes, indeed. And one of those days when I was looking for a random job on LinkedIn, because you find those kinds of job where you're asked to train particular AI, new AI software and things like that. And I signed up for that job. I was, onboarded on the community. And one of the things I noticed in the use of that AI software was that, yes, I could give feedback, but that feedback is still going to be moderated by someone. All right. And so if they are not much people like me who give critical feedbacks to those things, there is almost no hope of that getting into the system. So yes, people train AI models, and a lot of people tell the designers what they could improve on this, but essentially, and this is my opinion, it still boils down to who benefits from it. And so if that is not going to be in the larger interest of the software company, I bet it's not going to be taken up. So
I have to agree with presentation, even the comment about if you're applying for jobs, getting those different perspectives, because that's even when it comes to the graphics. As a minority myself, it is representation and really coming from the point of view of what your cultural background is, and then your perspective of if it's the language you're trying to speak, dialect, or even what type of story are you resonating to. So really great presentation, and I do agree with specific perspectives. And I think moving forward, we need to open up that conversation more about different language models to representation, to even point of views of who's actually in the room and having those collaborative conversations to push something forward. So.
I'm wondering about, it seems like there's I like your critique. I'm kind of trying to build on your critique and get into the some more details about your critique of the system in our history. And you rightfully use the extraction metaphor, history, reality, the extraction model where colonial, you come in and you take from people, from a nation, from a land. And then but I think the other thing that was in your presentation too was the suppression, denial, absence, erasure critique too. And I just maybe how those two are working together insidiously, or but also then the follow-on question to that would be, and you talked about the house always wins. So under the erasure critique, you kind of want to be there and you want to be represented. You want indigenous knowledge and wisdom to be there. But then there's also this worry that you have some places are so bad you don't want to be, So, I think we still have, I still use it too. The AI is still technical, although there's a lot of human actors and things at play. And then there's the world that's not AI, which is oral storytelling traditions and real humans and families and mothers to grandmothers to mothers to daughters. And do we want AI to mess that up?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I wouldn't know if I have a specific response to them though, but one of the things I was thinking about as I was preparing this to give this talk was the whole idea of race science, that assumes that there are certain sets of people who are not fit to do certain kinds of jobs. And I'm talking about STEM. As a matter of fact, that's one of the things my partner is currently researching, and she's looking at what informs African and African American women to pick up STEM jobs. And you'll find that a lot of them have been socialized to think that this is not for them. They're not just cut out for this. And so they are best used as users rather than developers. But I push back against that a lot because not only do humans have the capacity, and this has been established in science, to pick up whatever they are taught, but people with certain backgrounds and experiences are more able to, should I use the word, tweak it in such a way that it is more useful for them. And I'm talking about those with histories of deprivation, because you also talked about that extraction critique that I gave. Those with histories of deprivation have seen this a lot, and they can see it playing out again. And so with their, what they call natural sense, they're able to keenly decide or advise that these ought to be adjusted in a way that doesn't sideline certain people. But you're indeed correct to say that that erasure is something that isn't essentially an AI thing, because it manifests in other areas. It manifests even in politics. So for instance, I've been interestingly studying the Obama Presidential Center in the south side of Chicago that is still under construction. And some of the people in the area have been asking, what do you think about the Obama Presidential Center? Do you think it's something that represents your ambition, your reality, your aspirations? Because that is what the Obama Foundation is saying, that putting this on the south side, an area that has been historically known for violence and whatnot, for deprivation, to serve as an oasis of hope. And anyone who has been listening or follows President Barack Obama's speeches a lot will know that the rhetoric of hope is very abundant. And so I asked them, what do you think this center, this library, this infrastructure represents? And many of them are clueless. Some of them don't even know there is such an infrastructural development project in their community. However, and this is what I've asked from some experts, the establishment of that infrastructure itself threatens the very lives and livelihoods of the residents of the area. And I give you an instance of that. Some immigrants in Chicago flee their home countries due to war. This war were not a product of their own doing. This war was caused strictly or mostly because of the importation of arms into their countries. So the militarization of military aid led to the war that caused a lot of people to be displaced from their communities. Now, in trying to survive, because that's the human instinct, everyone wants to survive, but moving to the United States that is relatively stable, not as spurious as where they were coming from. However, there's certain structural indices that is now constituting a threat to displace them the second time. Now, these kinds of people are those you want to talk to when you're designing softwares on this kinds of issues. So, for instance, if a game was to come out on Meta Quest on, say, Civil War, and you're trying to train that, whatever it is, and you're inviting people to come test, you want to be sure that the people you're inviting are those who have some history and can tell you how they can relate to this from an historical perspective. So I think the erasure is not so much AI's fault as some certain conditions, social conditions that have already been in place before the AI software was designed. That's what I think.
We have a couple questions online.
Okay.
I don't know. Okay, I'll attempt to read it. Alamin El Nasir says, such a great presentation. My question is it safe to say Gen AI African storytelling do not have Afrocentric element due to the kind of prompt engineering enabled? I believe the kind of prompt generated is what it dishes out from the LLM. And he has a little describe at the end here. I'm asking this question because I am one of the recently trained participants at the just concluded LSA on Teaching Critical AI workshop, where we discussed at length the various lapses and disadvantages of AI in the world of today.
Yeah, and the LSA is the Legal Studies Association. It's the largest gathering of African scholars in Africa. And the continent of Africa is also realizing that they can't move forward without AI. And so they're beginning to mobilize their intellectual capacities to address this question, this issues. As a matter of fact, just last week, the State of the AI in Africa report for last year came out. And in that report, it was stated that the projection of the kinds of jobs that would serve the African economy in the next 10 to 20 years are going to be AI jobs. And so imagine students who are not already being trained about AI for 4, 5, 6 years, sometimes 7 years, depending on the crisis in the country, because that's something else that I've been paying attention to. And suddenly graduates and has little or no skills to adapt to the world around them. But to answer that question, I don't think it's simply a matter of giggle or garbage in, garbage out, giggle, the old-fashioned giggle. Because if it was so, then the AI software ought to be able to interpret certain languages, right? Because languages are universal, but still nuanced in some sense. So if I speak my local language, Yoruba, if you go to parts of Northern and even Eastern Africa, you'll be able to pick elements of that because of that universality of the Yoruba language. As a matter of fact, it's one of the largest spoken languages in the world. And so until recently, when OpenAI started designing other languages software, I could not prompt OpenAI with my local language and get a result, despite the universality of that language. So the prompt engineering shouldn't only be technical. That's what I mean. It should also be very cultural. It should be nuanced to the point of, assimilating as much, key factors in languages as possible. And that is where the natural language processors or processing technicians or engineers come to play. So yes, you can prompt an AI software to get a particular result, and it is how you prompt it that determines the result you get. But however, you will keep trying over and over again if that software doesn't understand the basic elements of the language you're prompting it with. So that's what I think.
We have another question. It's from iPhone. I have argued that AI is a reinvention of African knowledge systems, especially oral tradition, where the community is the custodian of knowledge. I agree with you when you foreground your discussion with Ubuntu. How do we decolonize AI and reassert our minority groups' dominance in this field, especially when many universities in Africa are yet to grapple with AI?
That's a very, very important question. Last semester, I took a course with Professor Faye Harrison of the Department of Anthropology on decolonizing knowledge. And one of those texts we engaged was by a professor of philosophy at Cornell. And he argued against the concept of decolonization. And according to him, he thinks that is another industry that is now rearing its head to kind of create a movement around it about why people of color, especially African descended people, should not follow certain methods or certain systems or certain technologies. So when we talk about decolonizing AI, an average observer would think, oh, I don't need to use AI because AI is extractive. And so I would abandon it altogether and use my old-fashioned literature review, my old-fashioned, search and keep searching and what have you. But no, that's not what decolonizing AI means. To decolonize means to think carefully about the use value of this thing. Whose purpose is it serving, regardless of what it is? I agree that there's some technologies, some knowledges that were built off of the exploitation of people, and it could be very personal for some people not to want to use those technologies. However, I think that that is not the best way to address exploitation. There's a word I learned from Professor Harrison, which is called reappropriation. And I think we need to start learning how to reappropriate the appropriated technologies over us. So to decolonize AI essentially means to reappropriate AI to serve your purpose. So one strategic and say practical way of decolonizing AI would be to come together, have a collective that creates an AI tool that serves a particular audience. And there have been cases in Africa where a group of young people are now creating their own AI softwares that can almost compete with OpenAI, but they don't have the resources to promote it. They don't have the goodwill by the government or the policy backend. And so we don't hear about them, but doesn't mean they don't exist. So that would be a practical way to decolonize AI, in my opinion.
There's another one. Okay. Has Africa benefited from AI so far? Oops. What can Africa do locally to join the global trend of AIization? Will Africa ever be overwhelmed by AIization? Do you think linking AIization to colonization is a bit extreme?
Yeah, well, I play with the extremities. That's one of the trainings I have as an African studies scholar. I would say yes and no. Yes, because currently you find that Africa is still struggling, and permit me to use the word struggle, not that Africa itself struggles, because it has a lot of local technologies that helps it, get the best of its situation. And that was what I learned in those two movies that I talked about earlier. The protagonists were able to use the local knowledges and knowledge of Western technology to address problems like insecurity, conflict, and what have you. But Africa is still at the rear in terms of optimizing AI. Rarely will you find an African country that has an AI policy or an AI governance, toolkit, for instance. And that's not so much because they don't think AI is important, but they haven't seen its immediate use for them. And so unless scholars within African institutions and the public space begin to push for this kind of governance documents that guide the use and optimization of AI, we will still be behind. However, I said no because there is such a thing as indigenous knowledge systems. There is a professor of history at the University of Texas at Austin that conceptualized something he calls ritual archives. And that's Professor Tony Falola. Professor Tony Falola conceives of ritual archives as those embodied volumes of knowledge that are yet to be mined. And some of them could include fabrics. Some of them could include ear breeding technologies. Some of them could include even, language use and all of that. These are natural technology that some people don't know are existing, but some people use them. Anyone who's watched Wakanda knows that there is such a place where there's a large abundance of certain rare earth minerals and resources that could be used to, defend yourself and all of that. Those kind of places exist in Africa. And that is why you find increasingly that there are conflict in those regions, because there is a global competition to extract those resources. But there are people who have been in those regions for centuries and have been protecting those resources, and they know how to use them. So we might think of AI in the broad sense of, oh, you getting a prompt from a software and getting results. But there is also the AI where traditionalists call on their gods for rain and they get it. What is better AI than that? So I'm saying that there are local technologies that some people have been trained to use in African countries that benefit them, but these kind of knowledges have not been systematically unearthed and integrated into the knowledge systems, the mainstream knowledge systems, and that's why we think that Africa is behind. But I say no.
I had one more, kind of in the spirit of the way where you were going. I remember last 20 or 30 years examples of this idea of leapfrogging with technology in Africa. I'm thinking of the Maasai and the tribes, and you don't have the infrastructure of desktop computers, and all of a sudden the cell phone comes, and it's like they're just instantly used in a way specific to the local culture that's effective and powerful. So I'm wondering if you have seen evidence of, you mentioned somewhat with the young people but are you seeing examples of it? Are you hopeful that maybe that leapfrog effect with AI in certain parts of Africa that sort of the people take it and use it? And this is also a friend, I'm reading a book, Kurlansky, he's famous for these books about salt and cod and stuff. And most of the time our theories of technology is it's somebody invents it and it's deterministic and it takes over the world. His theory and other people's theory of technology is that humans invent technologies when they need them and they want them, and the reason the book I'm reading is paper, and it fits and starts around the world for 1,000 years, right? And unexpectedly somewhat. So it's that leapfrog idea plus the idea that maybe people are able to find the technology that they need at the time, and that's when we see this massive growth of success.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that perspective, because the idea of leapfrogging to me isn't so much, like you said, deterministic, or someone creates it and someone else uses it to advance their cause. But I like to see technology as incremental. And so there could be an aspect of a technology created in the West and another aspect created down south that complements each other and helps both countries or both regions to leapfrog. And so whether it's AI created here, or whether it's the kinds of technology that the Maasai people use, or whether it's even local infrastructure fabrication to enable or embody the AI technology, that is one way to complement ideas. And that's one of the things following Professor Lufemi Taiwo recommend. I don't see these two technological development histories as necessarily oppositional. I think the more we think about them, we can carefully begin to draw alignments between them. All right. So if someone in Africa or in the African diaspora is able to develop a similar to AI software that can speak a local language, and that happened recently in Canada. I was reading a report 2 years ago where a group of young African doctors who are now living in Canada were able to use sounds, local sounds, to be able to detect certain medical conditions in people. And tracing the history of the idea, they came about those ideas from their parents, from storytellers in African community. You have such a person who tells you, oh, this is what happens when you do so and so. And so there is a call and response, more like a human thing. And so people visit traditional healers to tell them what is wrong with them. And they begin to ask them to chant or sing or whatnot. And however, are able to detect what is wrong. And these young folks were able to use that knowledge, that natural or indigenous technology, in their AI industry, and now they have a software that uses sounds to detect. That is the kind of complementarity that we should aim towards. That complementarity that doesn't displace one or privileges one over the other. That's what I think.
I had one last question. It kind of aligns with what Robert was saying. I know your research is within Africa and African diaspora, but what would you say in regards to those other countries, for India, who uses a lot of natural resources, to South America, who has similar constraints if it goes to resources, to honing in on, do we have AI influencing, or should we just go to our natural rituals that we are known for? So what would you a kind of perspective on merging and combining those AI tools in regards to the natural holistic approaches?
That's a great question. It's actually very fluid because these things have repercussions for even how the software is taken up. And so unless we carefully understand how people receive technology, we at risk of, making them dislike it altogether. And I say this because culture is a very, very very, very strong aspect of our personalities, how we were brought up, what we know about life. And it's quite difficult to push away those things just because you think this is useful, right? Time and time again, you find African parents, and I'm saying this because I just had that conversation with my own parents 2 days ago, who tell you that there is a way you need to do things. This is the way I've been doing it, and it's worked for me. My siblings and I are like, actually, there are multiple ways. And so, because you want to respect them, you listen to them and you accept what they tell you. However, you also understand, giving you exposure to technology, that this can be applied in a variety of ways. And so the problem most technology marketers make when they are marketing technology to the global south, because that's where India and other countries are, do it in such a way that they put it right in the face of the users that this is the only solution that can solve your problems. And people are like, I've been using this for centuries and it has solved my problem. So why would I pay extra to use this that I don't? And I had this conversation with one senior colleague of mine who still is fixed in using, I think it's Windows 2003 or one of those Windows software. So I'm still learning how to use this, and now suddenly there's another version. I can't go crazy on this. And so I'm like, well, sometimes you have to reinvent yourself. And so what I say is that the way we market the AI technologies matter in allowing people to accept it. And this is where cultural ambassadors needs to be involved. In the documentary of the production of Iwaju, the movie by Disney, they hired some cultural consultants to advise them on the language, the presentation, the architectural artifact around Lagos, and that played into the special effects design. However, like I said earlier, they still want to make certain market decisions. And I know this because I was speaking with a lecturer here at the U of I who told me that a friend of ours was hired by, I think, Disney to consult on a project they wanted to do in Africa, I think Eastern African this time. And our friend was telling them, no, that is actually historically inaccurate. And they wanted him to, align it in a way that fits their narrative. And then you know that there is something larger at play there. So the mistake that some Western technology firms make, even when they hire cultural ambassadors, is that they always wanted to respond to market demands. And this is not how people use technology. They use technology based on their belief systems, their cultural understandings of the world, and you know, if we want to convince them that this is also useful, we need to start from where they are. That's what I think.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're.
Thank you too for having me. I appreciate it. Look forward to more often.